Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, James Protin. Every week I will be sharing the experiences that have defined my journey and talking with people who have their own powerful story to tell. It's about doing better and being better in life, business, and all things in between. The visually inclined can catch us on YouTube, or you can check us out on just about every podcast platform. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. We're coming to you from Chico Bocello, our home away from home, and we have a very interesting guest for you today. My new friend, Christine Brookins of Oakbridge Advisor Group and Outspoken. Christine was introduced to me by Melissa Migliaro, who is, well, if you're familiar with the podcast, you're familiar with Miggy. She's one of the best, and we love her to death here. And she was gracious enough to introduce us, and it's I'm excited. Welcome. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
We had when we met, we sat here and we had a really interesting conversation, and I was just hooked. You have a great story, and I'm gonna guide everybody through this because there are a bunch of different facets to you. Christine is not just a straight line. There's a lot of things going on there.
That's okay. Everybody has a lot going on. That's one thing I've learned. People have stuff, and you don't know everybody's stuff. But I appreciate the opportunity to share some of my journey.
Very, very good. So let's start with how do you and Melissa know each other?
Melissa and I met doing work together for Uncathlon to benefit Special Olympics.
Okay.
It's a
Familiar.
unified sports competition that takes place annually, and we've worked together on the committee for that for a couple of years, but we can get more into that later.
Okay. That's very good. So before we get into deep, we'd like to have our guests just talk a little bit about yourself. Tell the audience, a little bit of who is Christine?
Well, first, for anyone who is visually impaired or just not seeing us, only listening to us, I am a middle-aged Caucasian woman with brown curly hair and glasses, and today I'm wearing a purple sweater and black pants. I am also mom to 4 adult children, the oldest of whom has multiple disabilities, and we'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. My other 3 children, after earning their degrees, all moved out of state, and I am looking forward to them coming home for a visit soon. And I've been married to my husband, Titus, for many years, and I am mom and wife, and I'm also sister to 4 siblings. So all of that, I think, influences everyone's life story, the roles that they fill along the way.
And it's multiple roles, and I think it's a we were talking about this earlier. We have kind of a balance. We're pretty balanced between men and women as far as the guests go. And one thing that I'm fascinated between men and women. Well, there's many things. But one thing as far as the podcast goes, women tend to have those multiple roles and carry them in a different way than men do. Husband and dad. Okay, that's about all we can handle at one time. But women are remarkably resilient and able to juggle those multiple roles.
I think that's just part of life, and you learn that along the way. And I think just inherently women and men approach things differently, but that's okay. That's what gives us the balance in the world. Yeah. So yes, these are some of the roles, and I also have professional roles as well. Mm-hmm. I am a financial advisor, and I also am a disability advocate and trainer. So I like to kind of weave all my roles together in my passion and what I do and how I do it. It all kinds of comes back to the same source. Okay.
So your involvement with Special Olympics and is through your son. And how old is your son?
Yeah, he will actually be 37 at the end of January.
Okay.
And he's been involved in Special Olympics for over 18 years, I believe.
So you've been on this journey for a while.
I have been. And that's why I like to share.
So yeah, tell us a little bit. How did you get into this? As far as I realize your mom and your son, but how did you get into this journey, and how has it played out for you as far as your relationship with him?
Well, I'll start with it going back quite a long ways, but it really started when my son received his first diagnosis, and along the way there have been
He was very young, right?
Yes, when my son was 18 months old, he
Okay.
was diagnosed with a brain tumor on the stem of the brain called an
Okay.
astrocytoma. One of the things that we were told at that time was that they had never seen a tumor of that type in a child so young.
Oh.
So they literally could not give us a prognosis. They had no background for it.
Right.
And
What did you do then? I mean, how did you
Well-
react? I mean, that's heavy news.
yes,
to get
and
for,
I
a talk.
remember receiving the news. They sat us down in a room with a neurosurgeon. They had a physician's assistant, all the way down the nurses to a social worker, all the way from here's the diagnosis to do you understand it to can you deal with it.
Okay.
And then it was, this is the next step. And realistically, it was diagnosed through a biopsy. And they told us, due to the location on the stem of the brain, it was inoperable. So they didn't want to do anything until he was at least 2 years old. And at that point, it was, yes, like you said, heavy news, but the reality is we couldn't change our day-to-day lives. Because they weren't even doing anything yet, number one. Number two, at that point, we were expecting our second child.
Oh, geez.
So we did have to go on with life with this new knowledge.
So how do you, when you sit there and look at, okay, next steps at that point, and you're first-time parents, you have another one on the way. I mean, what is that like? I mean, how did you just really kind of find that path forward? You talked about next steps. Where do you go from there?
Well, fortunately, Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, and for those that don't realize, this was the old hospital, not the current one.
Yeah.
But they were very helpful in connecting us with necessary resources. One of those was Easter Seals.
Okay.
So my son had participated in an Easter Seals preschool program.
Okay.
And because of that, it already put us on the path to make connections that I would have had no way of knowing what to
Sure.
do or where to go.
Oh yeah. I mean, how would you know? I mean, you
don't.
at that point, it's wow. I can't even. I have a lot of kids, grandkids, and everything. Geez, Christine, I can't even imagine what it's like to hear that kind of news. I just can't.
Well, as I said, there's enough going on in life, and they weren't doing anything right away. I couldn't react in a whole lot of ways because we had to move forward
Right.
with day to day. They told me they weren't doing any treatment for quite some time, so let's move on with the day to day, and we did. And
Were you
so,
able to exhale a little bit at that point? Did you, or were you still?
it's a really good question. I never thought about it that way. I guess to some extent, as a parent, anytime something goes on with your child, you're still holding your breath.
Yeah.
But I can't hold my breath for 37 years. It just can't happen.
Right.
And I think it was kind of twofold that that is heavy news to hear, but we're not doing anything with it. We need to move on. We were expecting our second child, so we needed to prepare for that.
Absolutely.
We needed to live our everyday lives, and that included my husband and I going to work every day. So kind of one thing led to another. From the Easter Seals program, my son was referred to a therapeutic preschool. At the therapeutic preschool was where he received his additional diagnoses.
Okay.
And some of the terminology that was used back then isn't used today. So one of the diagnoses is mental retardation. That is not an acceptable term any longer.
Right.
We use the term
Right.
intellectual disability.
Yep.
They also said that he had pervasive developmental delay. And I hadn't been familiar with that term. I worked in childcare, I studied psychology, I knew child development. I had gone to the library to do my research. For the younger generation, that's how we did things.
That's how you
back
did
then, right?
things then.
So I said to the team, I said, don't you think he has autism? And they said, oh, that's one of the things. PDD, pervasive developmental delay, is an umbrella diagnosis.
Okay.
Autism is under that. They also told me he had childhood schizophrenia, which did take me by surprise. My reaction to that was, well, he does have some kind of erratic behavior, so maybe that is the case. I'll tell you, today I don't believe that was ever an accurate diagnosis, but we know so much more today with medicine. We know so much more about autism.
Sure.
That they were working with the best information they had then, and still having that information was better than the day before when I didn't have any of that information.
Right. 37 years ago, autism was really a new thing. People didn't, you know, when you think about behaviors, you know, ADHD and things like that, and autism, the autism spectrum, whether it's Asperger's or whatever, you know, what's the symptoms, the behaviors that define that now have always been there.
Yes.
You know, but we didn't have them collected into a collective diagnosis of like autism or whatever it is.
Correct.
So that was new stuff then.
Yes. And I think, you know, saying new stuff, it was new in the fact that it wasn't known many years ago. We didn't know as much about autism years ago as we do today. Autism spectrum disorder is just that, a spectrum.
Right.
So you've probably heard it said before, but if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, because everyone is different.
100% right.
And it is that total spectrum. So there may be some similarities. There are things that are common among people who have autism, but that doesn't mean that everyone is alike. And we've learned that over the years, thankfully, because unfortunately many years ago, kids were labeled as bad kids.
That's where I was going with that, and that's, you know, one of our granddaughters is on the spectrum, was diagnosed as, you know, she's 18 now, and if she came in here and you sat down and talked with her, if I hadn't told you that, it'd be hard for you to figure out. Now you would understand because you get the behaviors, and they're subtle little things that if you didn't
Sure.
know her well or understand, you would not say, you know, she's like a normal teenager.
Right.
And I use that term normal loosely. That's not. But what to say is, you wouldn't know.
Right.
You know, and I think that's important to note, that this is something that, even though we've come a long way with understanding autism, there's a long way to go, because as you said, it impacts everybody differently.
Yes. One of the ways that it impacted my son, starting back then when he was in preschool, that therapeutic preschool program was only half a day. So that program was designed to help somebody like him.
Okay.
I couldn't work just a half a day. My husband and I both worked full days. So the therapeutic preschool would provide transportation, and they took him to the childcare facility where my other son spent the day. But Kellen could not function in that setting.
Okay.
If you consider there were too many people, too much stimuli, and just as a young person, even someone who doesn't have a diagnosis, kids at that age need a lot of attention.
Well, it's intimidating. It's intimidating
Sure.
for youngsters that age to be in that with a lot of people in that space.
Absolutely.
Especially people they don't know.
Right.
Yeah,
And for
absolutely.
my son, you know, my other son was now there full day, and he thrived in that environment, but that was for him. For Kellen, he was having trouble just getting along in that environment. And thankfully, the folks there, the director worked with us as much as she could. We kind of worked out a deal that she would try to provide extra staffing around him when possible, if we would try to have him out as much as possible, meaning when we could take days off, or half day, or take him out whenever it was, provide other care. It was kind of a deal that we made, but that was never a long-term solution. So I started looking for, who can help me? What can we do? What's out there? And I found nothing.
Really?
Well, I'll date myself when I say this. I was desperate to find anybody, something that could help me. So I called every number in the blue pages of the phone book. And I know millennials are saying, what's a phone book and what are the blue pages?
You know what the blue pages are? I didn't think so. I do, though, so don't worry. Say yes.
In the blue pages of the phone book, it listed government entities. And I figured somebody out there had to give me some kind of direction. And I just kept calling and calling and calling until I found someone that did provide some direction.
Okay.
And ultimately what I found was that there was a funding stream to pay for the type of care that my son needed, for therapeutic one-on-one care.
Okay.
So it wasn't a daycare setting. It was how to function in society, how to function in the house. What specific things did we need to avoid danger? What did we need just to get along in the day-to-day, because a lot of things were overwhelming? And I did not know that for what it was. I have learned in my professional training that it is no wonder I had such a hard time finding supports and services for him. The funding did not exist until 1991, right around the time that we were looking for this. My son was born in 1987.
Wow.
Prior to that, Medicaid would pay for people to be institutionalized. So if you consider not until 1991,
But not for treatment, not for.
it's called home and community-based supports. So the supports that my son began receiving at that time and still receives today allow him to live at home with my husband and myself, has allowed him to be part of the family, to be part of the community. But realistically, if we didn't have those supports for him, one of us would have to stay home with him. My son, to this day, does not have any safety skills. We have traffic outside the window, and he can look, and I would say, what color is that car? And he would tell you red car. But there's nothing that would keep him from stepping in front of it. He doesn't understand those things. Hot stove, he would touch a hot stove. So there are things that he can never be alone because somebody else has to secure his safety for him. And imagine, as a toddler, the level that would have been.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Kids of that age are just starting
They're
to learn
curious.
those things.
I mean, they're that natural curiosity comes out. That's when that really, and they're just touching and grabbing and crawling everywhere.
Right. So I was so grateful to have somebody dedicated to not only caring for him when I was not available, but supporting him in ways that I didn't know how. Sure. I mentioned I studied child development, but that was typical development. That was not neurotypical development.
Well, you really educated yourself, though. I mean, you did your homework, so to speak. You went and dug in like a lot of moms would, okay? And again, it goes back to that mom thing. You weren't just going to sit back and accept that this is your little boy is this, and this. You made sure you knew what this, and this was, and that actually fit.
Well, you have to do that. And I know, today, if a parent receives a diagnosis for their child, the first thing they're going to do, Google it.
Yeah,
right? And fortunately, well, and we didn't have the internet back then. So now we do, and now we do have access to resources. You don't always know what is a good resource, what is valid, but you do have access to things. I would also say the supports and services that my son receives today, still to this day, his day-to-day routine includes getting on an access vehicle.
I was going to say, could you talk us through his day?
Yeah, so getting on the access vehicle in the morning is covered by the Medicaid waiver.
Okay.
That vehicle takes him to an adult training facility covered by Medicaid waiver. In that ATF, he is learning skills, hopefully transferable skills that he could potentially take to a job.
Okay.
He still doesn't have the safety skills, so he could never be left alone. But if he learns the skills, administrative skills, computer skills, cooking, cleaning, skills that everybody learns hopefully as they mature to adults, he is learning those things, and with proper supervision, could transfer those skills potentially to a job setting. And then that program goes essentially 9 to 3. And then we have staff, habilitative aides, that pick him up from the program and take him out in the community so that he can go out in the community just like everyone else. He can go to a store. He can go to the movies. He can go to a park. And with somebody one-on-one with him, he is safe, but he is also encouraged and supported to be an active participant.
To be independent.
To be as independent as he can be.
Right.
And another example of a service that he has is respite care. Sometimes I have to travel for work, and when I do, if his schedule doesn't line up with my husband's schedule, which is often the case, in the mornings my husband is off to work before my son leaves the house. So we also have respite care where my son goes and stays elsewhere with staff, and it's like a vacation for him sometimes.
Yeah.
But that is also funded by Medicaid waiver. All of this, I didn't know it for what it was at the time. Back in 1991, when I found somebody that said they would help, I knew that my husband and I could go to work every day and he would receive proper care, And I knew that somehow, somewhere, the government provided funding. What I remember them saying years ago was Title 19 funding.
Okay.
I know that today as Medicaid waiver, and I today know there are different types of waivers, and that waiver refers to Medicaid waiving the requirement for the individual to live in an institution.
Okay.
So
I get it. Yep.
that's where the waiver came from, and what I learned is my son was the first person in what they used to refer to as a catchment area. They don't even use that term anymore, but essentially it was a geographic area. So
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
consider
sure.
maybe like the county in which we lived.
We actually use that term in engineering.
So it was he was the first person. So no wonder I had such a hard time.
yeah.
It didn't exist before he did. He was number one. And because of that, we got in on the ground floor, and he is blessed to still have those supports and services today. I know there's a long waiting list in Pennsylvania that is several thousand deep. What I would share with your audience is if they hear that and become discouraged, it does not work like taking a ticket from the deli. It is
Okay.
not your number 300 and 299 people go before you. It is by urgency of
Okay.
need.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I can tell you a little bit about how that will work. As an example, a student that is in school that receives additional supports often will have an individualized education plan, an IEP. And those students that have IEPs receive the support that they need to receive the free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment, and which will be unique for each individual.
Sure.
For some individuals, that means continuing school beyond what would be senior year or age 18. In Pennsylvania, the age was just raised from 21 to 22.
Okay.
So if somebody needs that level of support, they can remain in school, and part of what's so important about that is paid for by the public education system.
Really?
So your 9 to 3 day, or whatever the typical school day is, the individuals that need that can remain in school until the year in which they turn 22.
See, I didn't realize any of this was a thing. This is really very. There are so. It's the building we're in with ARC in this building.
Absolutely.
It's very, very timely. So my understanding that had you not found that program, your son could very well have been institutionalized then.
Yes,
I mean, really wasn't.
The choices back then might have come down to our household trying to live on one salary because one parent would have to be home all the time, or placing our child in an institution where he could receive the care that he needed, that if we were not with him 24 hours a day, we could not provide.
That is. Wow. I mean, I can't imagine being faced with that type of decision. Thank God you dug in and really educated yourself and looked for these things and started to understand all of this and become an advocate.
Well, I'll tell you that, you ask about would that have been the choice? And today I can say, looking back, those were the two options. At the time, there weren't two options. There was not an option. My son was not going to live somewhere else.
Sure. Yeah.
I needed to find a way that I could provide what he needed and provide for our entire family. That's what my husband and I needed to do. So we did. So it
you
was
did.
never an option.
Right.
Fortunately, I dug in and I did find support. And one of the things that I do today, you mentioned being an advocate. I'm not only an advocate for my son, I advocate for anyone with any disability.
Okay.
And the reason that I do that is that you don't know what you don't know. Nobody gave me an instruction booklet. I know no kid comes with an instruction booklet, but add on some of the exceptional needs.
Sure.
And if you don't know where to turn, how do you find that? So I make it my business to share the resources. If I find something, I'm grateful to have it. I want other people to know about it.
Right.
And so I do that in a couple of ways. One of the things that I do every month, I offer a virtual speaker series to provide a different resource to the disability community. So we've been at it, I think this is month 32. And I've presented information from doctors, from lawyers, from first responders. We've talked about fitness, nutrition, behavior therapy. We've talked about behavioral optometry, dentistry for special needs. And the doctors and the lawyers are unique to working in the disability community. Any kind of resource that anybody with a disability might need, I want to find it and I want to share it.
Thank goodness for you. I mean, so, wow. That's quite a journey, my friend. I mean, you have gone all the ups and downs and twists and turns and navigated that, and now you're able to give back to people who do you find connection with a lot of people or that find themselves young parents with young children that were where you were when you started that journey?
I do. So one of the things that I can tell you, one of the toughest things, and we talked some about this, is receiving a diagnosis. And you go through kind of stages of grief with that, because at first you don't believe it. It's got to be wrong. It's your fault that you said that. It's not my fault. There's nothing wrong with my kid, because after all, we all want our children to be perfect.
Sure, that's exactly right.
And when you go through that acceptance, and then you can go to look for resources. And I try to help families through that in the extent that, as I explained to you, I couldn't take the time to think about any of this. I just needed solutions. But you do go through those stages, and I talked about the terminology and the diagnoses that my son received. I did learn a long time ago, you can call my kid anything you want to call him, as long as it means that it gets him the help that he needs. So along the way, he's gotten a lot of labels, but if those labels resulted in some level of support, the right doctor, the right treatment, the right funding stream, the right type of care, whatever that is, I don't care. Say whatever you want to say. But that's a tough nut to swallow for a parent.
It absolutely is, and that is a very, I want to say, a different outlook, because as you said, especially now with, in 1987, 1991, 1995, there was no internet, right? So we didn't have this, it wasn't out there. Now, you look at social media, everybody's kid's Mickey Mantle, everybody's kid is Taylor Swift. They're doing, and all these things and all this wonderful stuff. And if your child isn't that, that's hard to take. It really is. And I think that to me would be distracting in trying to find the right programs and the right thing. Somebody like you to advocate for me, for my child, would make that whole process that much, I don't say easier, because it's never going to be easy, but easier to navigate.
Yes.
Because I'm caught up in that. Every parent, like you said, every parent's caught up in that. We all want our children to be perfect. The last person that will see your child's flaws is you.
Absolutely.
The absolute last one. And it's as it should be. As a mother, as a father, we should defend our children to the absolute limit. That's what we need to do. We need to care for and nurture and defend our children. So it's hard when something happens, when something goes wrong, when they're not perfect.
Right.
And again, now the disability community, because of who we've become as a society, has a spotlight shining on it. And we love to label people that are different from us. We love to put those labels on people. And all of this, how has your son benefited personally from this journey? You've taken this journey with him. So where you started at 18 months old to where he is now at 37, almost 37. So I know it hasn't been an easy journey for you. Can you kind of give me an idea of what you feel his perspective on this is? Do you have an understanding of what he thinks of all of this?
Well, what I can tell you, one of the things, knowing what he thinks, my son is minimally verbal. One of the diagnoses is autism, so getting information out of him is often difficult. I can tell you his receptive communication is great. He hears everything.
Okay.
He processes it in his own way, but getting information out of him can be difficult. What I can tell you is that because we had these supports and services in place to benefit him, he's had the benefit of living at home with his family. He's had the love of family. He's had his siblings, the interaction. There's always the little sibling jabs, and he's part of that, right?
That's wonderful. That is wonderful.
I can tell you a number of years ago, I think it was around the holidays, probably when my kids were in college. So he got used to one by one, they all went off and didn't come back for a long time. And at first, when somebody is gone, he questions. He wants to know where they are. He'll just say the name. He might come and say, Jim, Jim, Jim. And I have to say, well, Jim's at work right now.
Okay.
Those types of things.
Sure.
He would do that with his brother and his sister, and I would say, well, they're in college. They'll be back for the holidays or whatever it is. And one year that they were all home, sitting on the couch, he comes in from the other room and just kind of wriggles in between them and sits down because now he was part of his family.
He was with his family.
And he likes that. So that's a way that he benefits, that,
Sure.
he gets the opportunity to feel the love and support of the entire family because he's had the ability to be part of that dynamic.
That's wonderful.
And without those supports, that may not have been the case. So I think from that perspective, that's where he has the benefit. He also gets to participate in all kinds of fun things because he has a family that gets him involved in things like Special Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
He does 5 sports on 3 teams
Okay.
and has been doing so for over 18 years.
What's his favorite sport?
That's a good question. So, I'm not sure that he necessarily has a favorite, but I can tell you that over the years, during the season, a typical weekend involves bowling on Saturday.
Okay.
And when he started, he uses a ramp to bowl because he just doesn't give it enough oomph without that.
Yeah.
And when he started, he would put the ball down, walk away, had no idea. Now he at least pays attention to the pins at the end, and he knows he's trying to do something there. I think he enjoys the socialization of being around his teammates. On Sundays, he swims on a swim team that we started, the South Hills Splash, that practices at Upper St. Clair High School. And thank goodness for the volunteers that are high school students that are one-on-one or two-on-one with the Special Olympics athletes, because they get to enjoy being in the water with the safety of knowing somebody is right there.
Oh, yeah.
And his skills have improved there. Just when we went back for the most recent season, he was working with his buddy, and one of the things I noticed right away is he was independently moving arms and legs at the same time, because last season his buddy was practicing kickboard, you kick, or here's how we do the strokes, so he learned. So he's improving in that. And then Monday evenings at Pathfinder School, he does multiple sports. So we finished up soccer for the year. He'll be starting basketball in January, and then in the spring they do track and field. And the same thing, I think he enjoys the socialization. He's made friends, per se, with his teammates, and it's good for him. He has the health benefits of exercising. He has the social benefits of being around his peers. And I think he just enjoys doing it, and his skills have improved in every sport.
That's awesome. That is awesome. My first exposure to Special Olympics was, I'm going to say, 1980-ish, in California, state of California. I went out there to go to school, and my parents' godson was disabled. He recently passed, bless him, but he was one of my dearest friends, and he was blind, and he was actually the best man at my wedding. Awesome. And so there was an event, and he ran track, and once around the track, and 400 meters, whatever it is, and there was a young girl who was a college student, volunteered, and she ran with him, literally ran the entire race backwards so he could follow her voice, talked to him the whole way, and he ran and followed her voice. And she ran backwards the entire way. And I remember, because I've been around sports my whole life, and I remember that being, it still is to this day, one of the most amazing athletic feats that I've ever seen. So have you encountered that person, that volunteer?
Oh my gosh. There have been so many along the way. We typically see volunteers start around the age of 12 because at 12, for one reason or another, whether it's scouts or religious or whatever, they're trying to get service hours. National Honor Society in high school.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of kids that start then. Some of the things I've seen have amazed me in this swimming program. These students had zero training. They just said, get in the water. They did not receive education on autism or Down syndrome or any of the other diagnoses. They just
Do you think kids
literally
just have
were
a
thrown in the pool.
natural kind of
Amazing that they pick up on things and on their own have learned to do things. One example, there was a young lady working with my son, walked him into the pool. They're standing in the water, so this wasn't deep. But just getting in, she wanted to dunk under the water and just get her hair wet to start.
Okay.
Nobody told her to do this. She told him put both of his hands on the side of the pool. And that was, not that he couldn't stand there, but that was her way of knowing that he was safe while she dunked underwater. Nobody told her to do that. And it's a simple thing.
It's but that's a thing. That's thinking. That's that young person thinking outside of
Absolutely. And I think, especially with the young people, they take suggestions better than some adults. We don't like being told what to do.
Sure.
Nobody does, but I think some of the younger people do. We have a swimmer who perseverates on the lights, so he's always looking up. So I made a suggestion that we move him to a lane where there weren't lights right above him. Did magnificently well, but it took the volunteers to be able to get him out of one place and into another.
Yeah.
So they took that suggestion very well. And there have been a lot of people along the way that are just so awesome in what they do. And typically they don't have any training. They just have good hearts. And
I think that's the biggest requirement.
It is.
I really do. I mean, I think if you have that heart for people and just for caring, and really that's what it takes. It just takes caring about other people.
Yes, it really does. And I think we find a lot of that with Special Olympics. And I say we because I, too, have been involved for over 18 years. I've been a volunteer. I've been a coach. I became certified in 2 sports that I can't even play. But it was what was needed so that athletes could participate.
Right.
I mentioned Uncathlon. I've worked with Melissa and the whole crew on putting together Uncathlon every year, and I think this year we broke $120,000 as an annual fundraiser for that. And
That's
I'm also,
amazing.
I mean, the athletes get to participate at no cost to them or their families, so these fundraisers are very important. But they love it. You had said something earlier about the people that they just like what they do. There was one young man that got to participate in Uncathlon this past year, which took place on a Sunday afternoon. He went away with the biggest smile on his face, and he said to me, Chris, we should do this every Sunday.
I love it.
So that just tells me we were doing something right.
I love it. I love it. Are you doing the polar plunge?
So I help with the polar plunge.
Apparently, Alex and I are doing the polar plunge.
Yay.
Nick thinks he's going to be out of town that weekend.
Okay.
But Andrew's
Wherever
going to be
Nick
on
will
the
be,
podcast.
there's probably a plunge there too.
Yeah. Yeah. So Andrew Fee's going to be. He's a friend. He's going to be on the podcast. Melissa introduced us to him
Yes.
a while ago as well.
Andrew has been amazing for the organization.
So I said, well, so Andrew, I'd love to have you on the podcast. He said, yeah, you're going to do the polar plunge, right? I said, well, apparently I am. So we're going to do it. But yeah, Alex and I will be there, and we're going to support it. So, but I think Special Olympics. I mean, it is what it is. It's just remarkable. How has all of this? I want to shift gears and go a little bit into your professional life. Okay, talk about Oakbridge. how did this journey impact your professional life?
Well, living this myself, having a loved one with a disability, I learned along the way that there are a lot of things that you need to do differently. So professionally, I'm a financial advisor. And I started off my career in financial services in an administrative capacity, did probably every job there was to do along the way, worked in supervision, and I'm currently a financial advisor.
Okay.
I work with nonprofit organizations, with companies, with families and individuals with both typical and special needs. And I'm required to let everyone know, now that I mentioned I'm a financial advisor, I have to say that securities and investments are offered through Securities America, Inc., member of FINRA, SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Securities America Advisors, and Oakbridge and Securities America are separate entities. Now that I've met my legal obligation,
That was
I
good.
can share that.
You made that entertaining. That was awesome.
So what I do as a financial advisor, I have that firsthand knowledge of the planning for your loved one, but in so many cases, they need to maintain eligibility for government benefits. The Medicaid that I mentioned several times in that waiver, that is a means-tested benefit.
Okay.
What that means is, for eligibility, income and asset limits are in place. And generally speaking, someone who receives means-tested benefits can have no more than $2,000 in assets in their name.
Really?
Really.
I mean, that's...
And I'm not talking, lifetime, day-to-day. I mean, literally, they cannot have a bank account that crosses over into the next month with $2,000 in it. Wow. So how do you provide for your loved one?
Yes.
Without giving it to them? And that's what I help people to do, is to plan the future for themselves and their family members without jeopardizing the eligibility for government benefits. So I partner with attorneys that I have vetted, that I really know what they're doing in the special needs space.
Wow.
You need to have legal documents in place. You need to have the proper beneficiaries in place, because the last thing you want to do is have that great Aunt Helen who thinks she's doing something great and passes away, leaving $3,000 to the individual with the disability.
Yeah.
And you may have now made them ineligible for those much needed benefits. So professionally, that's what I do, is I work with families.
You have a very unique perspective on this.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
You can actually, your journey with, through everything we just talked about personally is really a big asset for you, because you could really literally, I'm not talking about saving money, save people's lives.
Yes.
Because that would be devastating to someone to accidentally lose that benefit.
Right.
That's life-changing.
It is.
Wow.
It is. So I help families to do that planning, and with these families, it's so much more than just having enough money to live on in retirement, because often you're talking about loved ones that cannot support themselves, and families want to do the best that they can. So I help them to first put the oxygen mask on yourself.
Okay. Sure.
Because if you're not going to make it into and through your own retirement, there's no sense in planning for what's going to happen when you're gone, because there won't be anything. Wow. But there are ways to do that. So I work with those families to do that. And that's not to say that every client of mine has a disability, but statistically speaking, there are 4 of us sitting right here. 1 of us has a disability, or will at some point in our lifetime. And that is something else that I do, is I do training. I go out and educate people about disabilities, because you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes just knowing simple things.
And this is Outspoken, right?
Through Outspoken. I found that I was already doing some of these things, and I thought, no, I really need to turn it into something with a name, something that people can reach out. And because I am outspoken, I thought that was an appropriate name. So I'll go into an organization and offer training on disability etiquette. Using the right language makes such a difference in someone's life. We talked earlier about labels. use an appropriate label. And if you don't know, ask the person. And it's okay to make mistakes, but learn from them and move on. And then we talk about preferred communication means, because sometimes a person can't communicate verbally, but that doesn't mean they can't listen. That doesn't mean they can't communicate with you via some other means.
Right.
American Sign Language is not the only language. Sometimes you need a communication device.
Sure.
Sometimes you just need to allow the proper time for response. So I talk about that preferred communication means and considering that.
Sure.
I will also go in and talk about simple accommodations. I will talk to people about some of the presentations that I do look pretty boring if I use a PowerPoint presentation, because I purposely use a white background with black text. For those that may have a visual impairment, that's easier to read.
Sure. And you're very considerate of these, very conscious. I mean, giving our audience a description of yourself before we started. Almost 100 episodes, nobody else has ever thought to do that, right? And, you know, that's not that anybody else was insensitive to anything, but you're more, if anything, hypersensitive to certain things because of the journey that you've been on. Right. And, you know, it amazes me that in 2023, we still are where we are in corporate America when it comes to not only persons with disabilities, but persons of color, you know, diversity and accommodating all of these things. We really haven't come that far, and it's very distressing to me because I've seen it in the workplace, and it's unfortunate that that we still find ourselves here in this space.
Right, and that's where I'll just go in and do some training. You may not have experienced it before. Simple things. I know I've worked with law enforcement a fair amount, and I've had the give and take conversations. So I've had the benefit of law enforcement officers who know about disabilities telling me what their experiences are, but I can also educate them. For instance, there is, in general terms, maybe a 10-second delay in processing with someone that has autism. And again, we talked about the spectrum, so that may be, you know, not every person. But in a law enforcement situation, law enforcement typically encounter people on their worst day.
Yes.
And have to make split-second decisions. And you're going to make your observations and you have your training, but if your training doesn't include training on disability, they may make an assumption that somebody is on drugs when they might be
Oh my goodness, yes.
on autism or on Tourette. It's just knowing those things.
Right. And you know, I had a very good friend of the family, was a career police officer in Los Angeles, and he did training, and he told me a story that was totally amazing to me. Part of the training for new cadet police officers, they had a video, and you're supposed to react, right? So it's like, you know, so there was a young person walking toward a police officer, and the police officer is saying, stop, you know, giving instruction, and this person kept walking toward the officer. So at that point, you become the officer, and you're supposed to determine what to do. And fully 90% of the people, because the person just keeps coming toward them, like relentlessly, draw their weapon and shoot them. But right, the video where it ends, right before he comes up, and he had his wallet, he went like this, and he opened his wallet to show that he was deaf. He had a car, okay? And 90% of the cadets fail that particular thing because, I mean, self-preservation kicks in right away.
Sure.
Okay, you know, you fear for, you have that, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, that's a fine line to walk. You know, not all of us are in law enforcement, but even at, you know, like you had said, even at traffic.
Yes.
You know, if I'm driving a vehicle and your son walks out and I blow the horn, I have to be conscious of him. I can't count on the fact that he understands what that even is.
Exactly.
You know, so there's so much that you have. I think we as the general public have so much to learn.
Yes.
You know, from advocates like yourself, because the disability community is not going away. It's not. If anything, it's growing, and because our population is growing, so it's growing exponentially with the population. So there are people out there who innocently, through no fault or choice of their own, are literally in harm's way. and they need help, and all of us are in a position to help.
Absolutely.
All of us are.
And I think that the view of us and them needs to stop
It has
because
to
it's
stop.
all of us.
Right. They are us. There is no us and them.
Correct.
We're all one.
You can see that I wear glasses, so you know that I need glasses to help with my vision. You can't see if someone has diabetes or heart disease. You can't see if they have autism. You can't see if they are deaf or hard of hearing. There are a lot of disabilities that are what's known as hidden or invisible, but they exist. So statistically, 1 in 4 people will incur a disability at some point in their lifetime, and 1 in 5 Americans are living with a disability today.
Sure.
That does not mean using a wheelchair. That does not mean deafness necessarily. But if you consider seeing my eyeglasses, you know I need those to see.
Oh, yeah.
People are not wearing a sign around their neck with a list of diagnoses on them, nor should they ever need to.
Right.
So we have to do better in educating ourselves and everyone around us about the fact that these disabilities do exist and what simple considerations can you take.
Well, you're right, because even you and I wear glasses, okay?
Yes.
So you can look at me and say, okay, I have glasses, but what you don't see is that without glasses, I can't see out of this eye. You are just nothing but a blur.
Right.
I would not know who you were if I didn't have my glasses out of my right eye.
Yes.
I have no peripheral vision. And I shouldn't say that out loud because I probably shouldn't be. but no, I mean, I can drive, and you make accommodations.
Yes.
But that's a disability.
It is.
That is a disability. So as you said, one of the 4 is that's a disability.
And we have our glasses. What if I wore contact lenses?
Wouldn't know.
You can't see that.
You wouldn't know. Right.
And, it doesn't hurt to be human. It doesn't hurt to be kind. And
it costs nothing.
It costs nothing.
It costs nothing.
So, just take it into consideration. And that's one thing I would want people to take away. Be considerate of people. Consider that something may have happened to them. Consider that they may be living with or managing any health condition that you don't know about. Just be considerate.
My wife has type 1 diabetes. She wears an insulin pump. You wouldn't know it to look at her. You would never pick her as a diabetic, okay? But that is one of the most debilitating things that I've ever been around, as I've lived with it now with her for 20 years. And it came out of the blue. It hit her out of left field. She was 40 years old, healthy, active, ate right, did all of the right things. Didn't matter, So it's not. It can happen to any of us at any time.
It can. Any one of us could walk out of here today and get hit by a car. Any one of us could have that disease onset that you don't expect.
Right.
When somebody receives a diagnosis, they do have to deal with what that is. They have to educate themselves about it. But eventually, you live with this, you manage it. And I will tell you that receiving a diagnosis is not necessarily a bad thing. For someone who has a disability, that is so empowering.
Right.
It's empowering, 1, to have a name for it.
Right.
2, by virtue of having that name, that may be how you go and get the treatment, the support, the services that you need.
Right.
So it's not a bad thing. That's why, as I said, I tell families, you get through that. I learned to get through it. You get through that. You accept it. Okay. That's behind me. I'm moving forward. What do we do now?
Now, what do we do? What's the next step? What do we do from here? And I think this has been so enlightening, even more than educational. It was enlightening, and this is what I was hoping for, because, I have disability in my family. I've dealt with close family members who have struggled, and even especially my cousins, my relatives that are my age that have had issues, because in the 60s and the 70s, it was a different world. Thankfully, things are better now.
Yes.
We've learned more. Technology has come a long way, but it's still something that we all must take into consideration.
Absolutely.
And again, it really boils down to, as you said, Christine, just be kind to each other.
Absolutely.
Just be kind to each other. Wow. So listen, just winding up, and thank you for this. This has been such a wonderful call.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
I'm really happy we were able to make this happen. And I know we had to do a lot. That's why I'm holding these papers. You had to do a lot to even just sit here with us, because of your career and everything. So I appreciate you doing that. That was
Thank you.
you did more to be a guest on this show than anybody else has, believe me.
Well, I think it's important.
Well, the message is very important, and I loved our conversation. You're becoming a dear friend, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. So what we always like to end with: live, love, learn, pray, and inspire. Okay, that's the foundational principles of everything that I do, and we're building the podcast on that. And these guys are starting to get that stuff. The blog I write is something my father told me about years ago. He said, if live, love, learn, pray, inspire. If you do those 5 things every day, you're going to have a good day.
Absolutely.
Right? So of those 5 things, is there one that resonates with you, and why?
Oh gosh, well, all of them, I would say, because it is such a good credo, right? Live every day to the fullest. You learn from yesterday, but you have to move forward to tomorrow.
Yes.
So live. I mentioned my son having the ability to live at home and have the love of family. That is so necessary for everyone. There's love out there. Allow yourself to accept it and to give it, because you do get something out of that also. And as I said, I've learned a lot along the way, and my goal is that it won't be so hard for other people to learn. So I want to share. Pray. My faith is an authentic part of me, so I don't hide that from anyone.
It's the first and last thing I do every day.
Absolutely. I'm not here on my own. There is a higher power guiding me in everything I do. But I've been inspired by a lot of people along the way, and I hope maybe to be that inspiration for
You are, my
somebody
friend.
else.
You're very inspiring.
Thank
you. You have a great story, and you're one of the special human beings out there. And I'm thankful that you're a friend of ours, and that our paths have crossed and we've connected.
Oh, I'm so
Thank you.
grateful.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
All right.